is a multi-awarded Filipino science diplomat and stands among Asia's leading experts in environment, climate change, and disaster risk. He is the first Filipino inducted as Fellow of the Royal Society of Arts and recognized with the United Nations Sasakawa Award for Disaster Risk Reduction. Please welcome the founder and president of the Environmental and Climate Change Research Institute, Glenn Banaguas. Good to have you with us, Glenn. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me. Yeah.
So you've been bringing science and policy together for what, about nearly 25 years at the Institute. So how has that effort been going so far in determining climate change and disaster risk?
Yep, it was really a journey. When we started with the Environmental and Climate Change Research Institute, it's really hard to get people who have the passion to help the poorest of the poor, especially those who are the vulnerable sectors in the society, our farmers, our fishermen, and indigenous people. And I started with that. So when I started that years ago, my advocacy is really to how we're going to reach out to the most vulnerable sectors of the society and how we're going to bring science closer to their hearts. And that's how it started.
Interesting you ended up with your students because they're the ones who really latched on first up. But
Absolutely.
how did that convincing go? That you put in science into helping the marginalized communities from getting to be at the brunt of every disaster, every climate change risk
Okay.
faced here in the Philippines?
It's really very hard. When I started with Environmental and Climate Change Research Institute, I invited faculty members, but some of them rejected the offer, rejected the proposal. So
They didn't believe in what it stood for?
they did, but they were busy in teaching, and it's really very hard to convince them. Especially and research is that's not their cup of tea, or it's not really part of what they do. So I changed the thought. I changed my own framework. So why don't okay, I'm going to invite my researchers. I'm going to invite junior research scientist students who's going to be part of the advocacy. So I had to train them. I have to capacitate them how it's going to be done in the community. So I trained them, for example, for the laboratory, I trained them how to do climate modeling, for example, in terms of rainfall, temperature. That's the science part of it. And the other part is I want them to experience what is really happening on the ground.
The footwork. So
The
you made
footworks,
them
the fieldwork.
the field work. So you made
Yes.
them go to the communities, the marginalized
Yes.
communities that needed help. So what was the
Absolutely.
experience like?
Yes, I brought them to the poorest of the poor, to the farmers. I had to let them to experience what the farmers are doing, the fishermen are doing, or the IPs, and because I told them, these are the sectors who really deserve our help, our concern, our attention. So every time there's a disaster, these poorest of the poor, I mean these farmers, poorer becomes poorer every time there's a disaster. And if we look at the highest poverty incidents, these are our farmers, our fishermen. And that's the reason why part of the advocacy is to reach out to these people. Now, I bring them to those communities. And before I bring them, whether what, I have to train them, the proper questions. I have to train them what they're going to ask. So they are divided, biophysical, socioeconomics, psychological cluster, and there's also religiosity and spirituality. So this is the qualitative aspect of our research work.
There's a lot of science that goes into that. Could you cite maybe a community, a specific community na naging successful
All successful.
early on, because you've done nearly 25 years. So
Yes,
you must have these milestones
Yeah.
already.
Yes. We have one in Tarlac. The Tarlac is that's in partnership with the OML Center, the Oscar M. Lopez Center. So, and we in there we provided them the climate trends and projections, and the design is we designed an ultrasonic flood detector system for the most vulnerable municipalities and barangays. Now we also have in Palawan, the Climate Smart Palawan. I call it Climate Smart Palawan because we train the same approach. There is track assessment. The track assessment is we gave them the trends and projections in terms of rainfall and temperature, what happened before, what is happening right now, and what is going to happen in the future for the next 30 years and 60 years, and even 2100. Now, there's risk assessment for the communities wherein there's hazards. We estimate the different types of hazards, exposure and vulnerability, and then of course the impacts of the different types of hazards to the communities in Palawan.
Seems
So
like a lot of work done, pero kung iisipin nyo, yung si Super Typhoon Karina, doon talaga nauwi yung problema.
yeah,
I mean, it didn't even make landfall here in the Philippines. It
Yeah.
went through Taiwan, China.
yes,
Pero mga 6 million ang na-affect niya
yes,
in the communities, in Metro Manila, and yung Karatig Bayan.
yes.
What does that say about our state of climate change and the disaster risks?
Um,
Have we worsened in those 24 years that you've tracked scientifically at the Institute?
in the Environmental and Climate Change Research Institute, we always look at not just the intensity of these particular tropical cyclones, hindi lang yung lakas ng mga bagyo, yung mga areas of flood. We have to check ano ba nangyari dun sa lugar na yon before. Kasi every time ito yung tinatanggal namin sa mga tao, konting ulan lang, climate change agad. It's not that. We have to check what happened there before. Kasi you will only classify a certain area that there's what we call climate change if there's really change. For example, in Davao. In Davao, before hindi siya tinatamaan ng tropical cyclone, but now for the last few years tinatamaan na siya ng mga bagyo. Ibig sabihin nag-shift. So that's an example of climate change. Yung mga areas before na hindi na binabaha na ngayon binabaha. So yun yung mga examples ni climate change. So paano kami pumapasok sa istorya? So we're not in science because I trained them not to become a climate scientist, but I trained them to understand and how science is going to be useful to the communities. And ginagawa ng mga bata, sir, these are the different climate models, and these different climate models, these are the things that are going to happen in the community, in the province, city, and municipality. Okay, so if that is your initial finding, let's go there. So we want to make sure that na tama. I mean, that will validate your climate models kung talagang totoo yung nangyayari sa baba. So we go there, we interview people. This is the most exciting part, and this is what the kids want, interviewing different stakeholders. You interview the governor, the mayors, interview the local communities, and ask questions that are related to climate change and disasters.
Empowered as they are, and you talk a lot about the youth, the students
Yes.
whom you've taught and trained, it's really saddening to just come across a UNICEF poll that reveals about 26% of the Filipino youth believe
Wow.
that climate change and natural disasters are the biggest problems that they'll face in the future.
Yes.
A
It's
far
really true.
second, education, access to education comes a far second. What does that say about the influence that the youth have at this point in reversing what they fear might happen in the next few years regarding the climate?
That's the reason why I always invite the junior research scientists or the students to be part of it, to be part of any advocacy, because they have the voice. And I don't want them to be to be afraid of what's going to happen in the future. They have to be part of the solution as early as now. And I bring them to the committees because I want them to experience to what is really happening on the ground. I will even tell them, oh, if you become a governor or mayor, now you at least you know what you're going to implement in the communities because you saw them, you know what their needs are, and that's really very important. Now, I mentioned that I have been traveling all over the Philippines, and for every area, there is a different type of climate hazard. So there's no one solution that will answer everything. So every area has its own corresponding solution. So for example, in Luzon, these are your climate hazard. If you go to Visayas, they have different hazards too. If you go to Mindanao, they're also different. And the approach will also not be the same, but it has to be done in a different way.
But
So-
is it all too late? Because when you look at the World Risk Index, this was just back in 2023. The
Correct.
Philippines is ranked the most at risk.
Okay.
It seems like we hadn't been able to go beyond being at risk in these 20 or so years.
This is how I look at it. Sometimes we forget. That's the problem. In 2013, when Super Typhoon Haiyan or Yolanda made its landfall in the Visayas region, many thousands and thousands of people died. And we forgot. I mean, every time there's a disaster, we only engage the scientists to be part of the solution, wherein dapat we have to be proactive nga eh. I mean, we have to have the, the preparedness. You have to engage the scientists from the very start of a certain project. So, and these scientists can provide you what you should implement and the policies and the activities that you are going to provide in a certain community. Now, sa World Reach Index, it's really true. Um, Parang hindi yata tayo bumaba sa top 5. For the last few years, either we're number 3, number 2, or number 1. But last year, we're number 1 again. Simply because that um, I don't want to think that they failed to include the scientists, to provide them the right projections, and to give them the right solution. Probably what I can suggest in order to attack that particular problem is to train and capacitate more local government units. And this is what we found out. Um, would you believe less than 12% of the total number of the local government units have enhanced their comprehensive land use plan. So when you say enhancement of comprehensive land use plan, they haven't included or integrated the climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction management strategies into their plan. And they have so many plans, the comprehensive land use plans. They also have the CDPs, the comprehensive development plan. Some of them, they don't have the CDRA. CDRA is the climate disaster risk assessment. And the other one is the LCCAP, or the local climate change action plan. And this is really very important. These particular action plans are very significant because these will really address the needs of their local communities, of their people. And these are also important to access financing programs like the People Survival Fund, or PSF.
So it seems like we have a lot of plans, but they remain as plans,
Yes,
maybe
it's
even
true.
redundant as they
Yes.
are. Which is the best solution then? I mean, on the local government unit level, what needs to happen on the national level to get these plans going
Um, for
and
ex-
at scale?
We have, for instance, the LCCAP. We have the National Climate Change Action Plan, the NCCAP, and one of the problems when I was their advisor of this government agency, how are we going to mainstream the National Climate Change Action Plan, because they have 7 priorities: the food security, sustainable energy, water sufficiency, human security, number 5, the ecological and environmental stability, number 6, they have the climate smart and disaster risk infrastructures and system, and number 7, the knowledge management and capacity building. So um, to mainstream these 7 priority areas, so every local government unit has to create its local climate change action plan, focusing on the 7 priority areas that I mentioned. So, and some have done, and some haven't.
Why not?
Correct?
What do you
Um,
think is keeping them from doing so?
Number one, some of them, and this is what we found out, some of them, they don't have the capacity to do it. So, and others are really science-based. That's why they need scientists to help them. And part of the extending my help to the local communities is to train the universities that can provide them the science. That's why I train the academic sector. This is where I partner with the Philippine Association of Colleges and Universities, and part of the advocacy is we want the universities to take care of their own province, to take care of their own local government unit, because like what I said, I cannot be there all the time. I'm not getting younger anymore.
Of course, and we're there to capacity build, and that's most
Yes,
important, get the
absolutely.
youth going. Is there a
Yes.
specific LGU that you would cite as the best case, a use case?
Oh, wow. Uh, in Mindanao, yes, in Siargao State College, yeah, we had a good partnership with the local government unit there.
Before or after Odette?
That was before
Mm.
Odette. So they were able. I mentioned the People Survival Funds, the climate
Right.
finance. So they were able. They were the first ones who was um, the local government of Del Carmen was one of the first people, one of the first grantees of the People Survival Fund.
Of
So
the
they-
Department of Finance.
The Department of Finance used to be the Climate Change Commission. But this is a proposal. Before you can get it, you have to submit a proposal, and this will be approved by the board, by the People Survival Fund board. And the People Survival Fund finances climate change adaptation activity. Now, I mentioned Siargao because they were able to put up a climate field school for the farmers and the fishermen. So they're one of the first grantees. So and definitely we will also want it has to be replicated in other parts of the country. However, the only limitation of the People Survival Fund is it's a 1 billion grant. It can only be accessed by the local government units. Now, for example, if there are other sectors that want to access People Survival Fund, what they need to do is to partner with the LGU. with the local government unit. For example, the private sector also wants to help. They need to partner with the LGU to help them to access it. For example, the universities or colleges, if they want to help their local government unit, what they need to do is, okay, to assist, for example, in developing the proposal, because sometimes that is the challenge of the local government unit. The challenge is they're having a hard time to make a proposal, and that's the strength of the universities and colleges, because they can write a very good proposal.
Well, you mentioned the Climate Change Commission.
Yes.
Let's bring that in and how it intersects with the work you do at the Institute.
Oh, yes.
Because we also want to talk about the nationally determined contributions, the
Contributions,
NDCs.
Yes.
Very important because we're going to have to draft a new one come 2025.
Yes.
But we're still at this 1.5 degrees Celsius target.
Yes.
That seems to climate activists
Yes.
unsustainable.
Yes.
So where are we in that process of scaling up what we already have done in the past years and as we go into 2025?
Yes, for the national determined contributions, we have done a lot for the Philippines. Now, the only challenge, again, if you ask this is just my opinion, is it's, I think every stakeholder has to understand. Because if you ask an ordinary person, oh, what is your NDC? People will not tell you what NDC is all about. But if you ask other sectors, for example, the private sector, the NDC, some can provide you a specific solution, but some cannot, because they still don't understand the significance of NDC, because especially the private sector, because they will ask you, what is the significance of NDC to us? So, and that has been the answer that we get from the different stakeholders generally. So, all right, what if we exceed 1.5 degrees? So how are we going to benefit from it? So is there any benefit that we're going to get if we exceed 1.5? About even the estimating the NDC. So we have to explain it every single detail to them. And one of the things that we did, for example, with the Climate Change Commission, that's part of the training that we provide in the different parts of the Philippines. So I had a chance to work with them a few years ago when I was still a consultant with an international organization. And aside from giving them the climate science, so we invite someone from the Climate Change Commission to explain the NDC, and give them a talk about the significance of this. So, and then definitely part of the training is, it doesn't have to be very long. The training has to benefit all the attendees and how they're going to embrace the significance of that particular training. And based on our experiences, some embraced and some didn't.
Well, what does it mean to me, though? I mean, if I were to ask you as a citizen, an individual, what does an NDC mean to me, the nationally determined contributions?
It's about estimating your carbon footprint. You're estimating your greenhouse gas emission and, of course, or your carbon dioxide equivalents or your carbon footprint. Now, it's not really in the local government unit, but it's for the private sector, especially in their sustainability reports, and that's really very significant for them. Now, so how is that? Now, there are institutions, so I'll discuss the greenwashing later. There are institutions claiming that they are carbon neutral companies. But if you ask them what their carbon footprint is, the answer is, we don't know. So I was given a chance to give a talk in a conference, and I told them, never ever claim someone you're not. Because if there's an expert in the field and you mention that you're carbon neutral, and you forgot to mention, and you don't know what your carbon footprint is, you're bluffing. And that's a form of greenwashing. So how will you know if you are carbon neutral if you don't know what you emit? That's why you start with a baseline. Now, and this particular baseline assessment of carbon dioxide equivalents, or GHG, or your carbon footprint, is an input in creating your net zero emission roadmap. So if you won't be able to create a net zero emission roadmap if you don't know what you emit.
Yeah, pretty interesting. I'm now thinking of the kinds of companies that you held the talks with, the level of awareness in knowing what greenwashing is, in probably not knowing what it is to the extent that they're saying they know their neutrality or neutral positions. What's the level of awareness and appreciation among private companies?
There are some who believe and there's some who don't. So those are some of the experiences. I had a chance to talk to some of the CEOs and owners of the companies. They said, Glenn, we don't want to be part of it. I mean, we are supporting advocacy, but we don't want to be part of it. Why? Because you're going to estimate our carbon footprint. So what? I mean, it's good for you. At least once we estimate your carbon footprint, the next step there is we're going to provide you strategies on how you're going to reduce them. And part of it will also be incentives. You won't be able to know how you're going to reduce it unless you what? Unless you estimate it, and we're going to help you. We're going to help you on this. Now, it's not really more of a compliance thing because I know that if you estimate this, these are the strategies you're going to reduce you're going to reduce your carbon footprint or GHGs, then it's also more of a behavioral change. How these particular strategies are going to affect your employees, and that is very much needed. Now, we don't want your employees to to know or to feel, we're doing it because for compliance purposes. We don't want them to be that way or to feel that way. We want them to to feel and experience that the reason why we're doing this because it's more of a concern. It's more of taking care not only of my company but of course my my children's children, and of course my company and my community in the future.
You've had direct engagement with the private sector.
Yes, I
Well,
had.
one of your
Yes,
stakeholders, Philippine Airlines, you've been at some point the Chief Sustainability Officer and
Yes.
Resiliency Officer,
yes,
advisor
right.
consultant
Yes,
in its GHG carbon footprint estimation. And you also
Yes.
created the net zero emissions
Roadmap, yes.
roadmap for
Yes.
5 months.
Yes.
How did you help enable Philippine Airlines in a science-based decarb roadmap?
Yes. Well,
Given that it's a fossil fuel-led industry that we're talking about here.
yes. Philippine Airlines will always be close to my heart. I've been supporting the president, Captain Stanley Nam, not because he's my friend, but I've been supporting him in this particular advocacy. Before I became their Chief Resiliency and Sustainability Officer, I was their consultant, and part of engagement was to estimate the carbon footprint of Philippine Airlines from all sectors, from their aircrafts, the the fuel that they use, the infrastructures, the transport vehicles, everything, even the food carbon footprint. So everything was estimated. So and then, like what I mentioned, the inputs from this estimation of carbon footprint, these were serve as inputs for the creation of the Rice Pal program. I call it the Rice Pal program. So it's not just the sustainability um, aspect, but it covers R stands for resiliency, I inclusivity, S for sustainability, and E and culturability. So why R? Because it's resilience in terms of security, in terms of safety. So every time there's what are the different airports that need to be where Philippine Airlines are located. So we wanted to. I gave them the study, the level of risk and even the level of resilience if these airports are at risk for different types of hazards. So I gave them that kind of study. For inclusivity, um, it has to be inclusive. So it's not only for people or for the management who are going to provide you the solution to address the impacts of climate change. So everyone has to be part of the solution. That's why there is inclusivity in the Bryce Paul program. And sustainability, that's where you reduce your carbon footprint from different sources. That also includes the waste. For example, the hazard, your your wastewater, your solid waste, your hazardous waste, how are you going to reduce them? Because these are some of the examples of waste. Then the infrastructure. So for example, what types of raw materials are you using in order to reduce your GHGs? The building, the transportation, both private and public. So these are just some of the examples. And the inculturability, part of what I provided is Filipino Air is the heart of the Filipino people. It has to be felt not only by the employees, but of course by the people who are utilizing Philippine Airlines.
So
The
net zero
unculturability.
emissions by 2050, is that doable then?
Yeah, I don't want to sound so positive. Yes, it's doable. It has to be attacked in a different per sector. So what do I mean by per sector? For example, for the food carbon footprint, if this is what they emit, so there is a corresponding solution how they're going to reduce that. So for example, for the fuel, for the aircraft, so if they're using this kind of fuel, so we can use SAF. But it seems that there is
Sustainable aviation fuel,
yes, SAF.
which accounts for 65%
Correct.
of your net zero emissions goal.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
if we can't get to that, because a lot of the global critics say we can't even get to that because of the
Yes.
lack of
Absolutely.
feedstock supply
Feedstock
that's
supply.
needed to produce this kind of fuel, how can we even get to
The feedstock
the
is-
goal in 2050?
Yeah, the feedstock is only one of the raw materials that we're going to use for the manufacture of sustainable fuel is only one of them. I mean, the feedstock, the biomass, the used cooking oil. Just these are the different sources, the different raw materials that can use to manufacture not the biodiesel, but the sustainable aviation fuel. Now, the challenge is before you manufacture, is you have to get the accreditation. And most of the companies in the world are still on the infancy stage because they have to get the accreditation. And there's only one, I don't know if there are two already, but there's only one company that I know that is accredited to produce sustainable aviation fuel, and that is Neste in Singapore. So it's only one. Now, my recommendation before I left Philippine Airlines is if they can also manufacture SAF, if they can get that accreditation, all right, from the international organization, then they can manufacture sustainable aviation fuel. The challenge will be your raw materials that you're going to use, or probably you outsource someone to do it for you.
Now, that's the lens from the private sector,
Private
a
sector.
science-based
Yes.
assessment
Yeah.
that get us into the carbon emissions goal. But from the lens of policy, lawmakers in Congress have filed a bill back in November, the legal framework for the climate loss and damage accountability.
Oh yeah.
This is the first such policy in the world, if approved. What do you make of the bill?
Oh yes, it's perfectly all right because this is more of the accountability. We call it the CLIMA, right? The Climate Accountability Act, but still it's not an act, but it's a bill. Now, it's good because part of it is you make the private sector accountable to what they emit. So they emit, yeah, but of course we get the impacts. Yeah, if they emit this, then these are the impacts of what you emit. And we experienced that tropical cyclone, the super typhoon Yolanda, the Odette, Karina, and other types of climate hazards. We get the impacts of what these emitters are doing. So the other one is the loss and damage. It's good that there's now a bill. It is incorporated. But in research, you have been doing that, the loss and damage. That's part of assessing the risk. I mentioned the hazard, exposure, vulnerability, the hazard and the different types of climate hazards. And then in terms of exposure, every time there's a hazard, who are exposed? The people, right? The people. And the vulnerability parameter we use there is the Human Development Index and the poverty incidence. So where is the loss and damage come in? If the exposure is your infrastructure, your assets, that's where the loss and damage comes in. And we have been doing that for years already. So even before the bill before the bill was written, so we have been using that as a parameter, the gross domestic product in terms of damages and losses. Then we incorporate that to our exposure, then you will be able to assess the risk.
It appears that there also needs to be some kind of knowledge building or maybe
Absolutely.
capacity building, the lawmakers themselves, so they know what kind of policies should be approved. Is the private sector ready, especially the fossil fuel-led industries,
I think-
ready to be accountable?
Yes, they are. They have to. They have to be ready because based on my experiences talking to the private sector, these are some of the questions that I always hear from them. Glenn, how are we going to protect our businesses? Glenn, I have business in Visayas. What's going to happen in Visayas for the next few years? Some of my businesses are in the coastal area, so their concern is sea level rise. So how am I what? How am I going to? Can I sell my properties there? So these are just some of the questions that I get. So what I do is, okay, these are the things that are going to happen again in your province, cities and municipalities. So we provide them the climate trends and projections, the tracks, right, using global climate models, and these for rainfall and temperature. Then then we use the risk assessment, the comprehensive risk assessment, the hazard exposure vulnerability, and of course, the most important thing is the impact. So what are the impacts of these climate hazards to your company, to your people, and of course to the people who are living near your areas.
Are
So
you finding that more in the private sector are moving towards adaptation more than mitigation, where really much of the private financing is going into? The public sector very much involved in adaptation. You mentioned it earlier with the Department of Finance.
Yes, yeah, both. For the private sector, it's really more on mitigation. But now they're moving towards the adaptation because the mitigation, this is where the sustainability comes in, like what I mentioned. For the mitigation, this is where you reduce, you apply different strategies on how you're going to reduce your carbon footprint. But for the adaptation, that's what they need. Um, um, I mentioned this. I mentioned a while ago the businesses because last month I was able to talk to a businessman, and he owns a lot of infrastructures. And he told me, Glenn, because I am not really sure if I'm going to sell my properties there. So what are the impacts of sea level rise? Because it's near the seashore. So I gave them the list, the recommendation of what he's gonna do.
Philippines is just one. We're the most at risk, but we do have Southeast Asia as
Yes,
well
correct.
in that geographic spread, also hit by typhoons.
Yes.
What's the level of discourse and involving the Philippines when we talk in a regional scale?
All right. Thank you so much for that question. This is the time to tell them, to tell the world that we have science diplomats in the different areas. For example, in the ASEAN region.
What
No.
is a science diplomat, by the way?
Oh wow, these are scientists and engineers who are trained on how science will be communicated and how science will be used for policy making and decision making. When I founded that in 2016, I had to I had to provide trainings to the outstanding scientists and engineers of Southeast Asia. So it's like a competition. And then part of it is to train them. It's a 3 to 5 day training workshop where how they're going to use science to communicate. It's more of a science communication because scientists. If you talk to the scientists, they will provide you the technical terms, and people will not understand what they're talking about because they're very technical in nature. And if you're a science diplomat, it is your responsibility to bring science closer to the hearts of the different stakeholders because people will not understand the language of the scientist. And through training and through science diplomacy, we will be able to what? To communicate our work properly.
Why does it have to be a diplomat, though? It feels like you gotta stay cool.
Yeah.
Don't let the spirits rise because
Yeah.
when you attend the Climate of Paris Agreement,
Yes.
meetings,
Yes.
flares fly in those meetings.
Yes.
How much of a need really is it to be a diplomat when you talk about science in the context of climate change?
Because science diplomacy, it's not just about you're not only concerned about your own country, because you share your ideas with the different neighboring countries. That's why in the Philippines, not in the Philippines, but in the ASEAN region, when I founded that in 2016, so I was able to get and train scientists from the ASEAN region, from Brunei, from Cambodia, from Laos, the 10 ASEAN member states. And now we are more than 100. And these science diplomats, they are assigned they're assigned to the different government agencies in their own countries to help their government to integrate science into policy making.
What would you say is the one metric that you'd say you'd been a success in the ASEAN space when it comes to science diplomacy?
One of the success stories. Now we have an undersecretary, a secretary of state who is a science diplomat. Yes, he was trained he was trained here in the Philippines because all the trainings are held in the Philippines. So we invite speakers from the different sectors, from the TV station for science communication. We also invite lawyers, public policy experts, and these are incorporated in one particular workshop because these are needed for them to become a science diplomat. Now, like what I mentioned, since this is a science diplomacy thing, we share our experiences the experiences in Brunei, the experiences in Malaysia, and we found out that every particular country has its own strengths and weaknesses, and every country has its own need, and the science diplomat plays a vital role for that.
Inclusive as we want to be in the ASEAN space, we also want to be as inclusive in the local
Yes.
ecosystem, if you will, and be gender responsive, also be mindful of
Yes.
people with disabilities. You mentioned IPs, the
Yes,
indigenous
yes,
people,
yes, correct.
children, women,
Yes.
the marginalized. How much of a progress have we made when we talk about inclusive, gender responsive climate change and disaster risk plan?
Okay. If I go back to my own research institute, the ACCRI, I was able to, together with my research scientists, we were able to capacitate and train more than 800 provincial and local government units all over the Philippines. And for the for the community of farmers, fishermen, NGOs, civil society organizations, the youth, the women, the PWDs, around 500 organizations. Now, yeah, and then for the universities, again, more than 500 universities and colleges and schools. So the purpose of that particular training is for them to come up with the most research sustainable solution. So when you mention gender, we have that one study, a research project in Palawan, and these are the Tagbanwas IP. So we train them not only to do climate modeling, we also train them how um, to to work, all right, to work. That they're not just fishermen. I mean, they are not just wives of the fishermen. What can they do? So it's because most of these women, they just stay at home. Doon lang sila sa bahay. Wala silang ibang ginagawa kundi tulungan at mag-alaga ng mga anak. So in that particular gender approach is we were able to identify what they should do before, during, and after disasters. So now, I'm not going to limit that because I call it the FBDRM. FBDRM is Family-Based Disaster Risk Management. So it's more of, that's where we can discuss the gender thing. What is the role of the father in the disaster? What is the role of the mother? What's the role of kuya? What's the role of ate? So all of these members of the family have specific roles before and during after disasters.
Interesting. And when you talk about the fisher folk, the farmer, it's really the agricultural community that
Yes.
we're so wanting to be involved with, because their livelihood
Yes.
get wiped out
Yes.
in any typhoon that hits their own farms and communities and fisheries. In fact, I do have statistic here that shows the World Bank foreseeing our agricultural productivity here declining by 9 to 21% because of climate change.
Yes. Yeah, it really happens.
Could it be as worse as double digits?
Yes, because the poorest of the poor, every time there's the poorer becomes poorer. I mentioned that a while ago. They have what? They have the agricultural land, but once it hits, it will take months or even a year before they can recover, before they can plant again. That's why I always mention every time there's a disaster, the poor becomes poorer. Fisher folks, they can't go fishing every time there is typhoon, because their lives will be at risk. So it's and you know how much they earn every day? They earn only 200 pesos a day, based on our research. These are and some are actually less than 500 pesos. So, and that's how poor they are. And these particular 200 pesos, this is where they're going to get their rice, the food that they're going to eat for the day. 200 pesos per day. That's the average earning of a farmer and a fisher folk. So, and now, if you integrate climate hazard there, what if they are hit by climate hazards or typhoons? Nothing. And based on our study too, it's not just the local government unit. Do you know the budget of the local government unit every time there's a disaster? Now, under the Disaster Risk Management Act, you get the 5% calamity. You get the 5% calamity fund from your total revenue. Now, based on the analysis, for example, if 10% of the total population is going to be affected by a certain hazard, the budget of local government units is only 100 pesos, less than 100 pesos. Now, if all of them are going to be affected, based on our research, 10 pesos, that's the budget of the local government unit to a certain, well, to a certain person. So that's how low we can only allot to these affected individuals. So those are the things that I think have to be taken into consideration and have to, I think it has to be there should be another policy that will look at this particular loss uh, by, um, by, by considering some of the research works done by the different scientists around the Philippines.
Well, let me give you another insight that involves not low budget, but massive expenditures. And
Oh,
this
wow.
one comes from the climate activists. They point out that we have so much expenditures for climate-related projects aimed at offsetting the risks and negative effects. And
Yes.
yet, we still feel the full brunt
Yes.
of climate change and disaster risk. What do you say to those who claim that the spending is happening is nothing more than an attempt to greenwash environmentally damaging development projects?
Yes, because this is in terms of allocation. It really depends on the allocation because
So we do have poor allocation of these massive expenditures.
yes, absolutely. Yeah, we do have. Based on our experiences, again, um, there are programs, and this is for the provincial government. It's very hard to mention the names. I'm really very sorry about that. That's why I'm not going to mention any specific provincial government. Based on our experiences, for example, Glenn, this is what we want to do in our province. My answer will always be no. So how sure are you that that's what if that is the need of your people? Why don't we assess them first, all right, and make sure that it's not there will be no mismatch that's going to happen, because that might be you want. I mean, the programs that you want to implement might be correct for you, but are these programs the real needs of your people? Will they address the needs of the society? And you have to address that. And it can only be done if you're going to conduct a comprehensive assessment or needs assessment in your area.
And also provide adequate accountability.
Absolutely, that's part of it, yes.
But how accountable can they be for such massive expenditures?
Now, they can only be accountable. Before we go to that, before we go to the accountability, you have to present the research. We have to present the assessment first. And then we'll tell them, see, so this is what's going to happen in your province. So now, are you willing to sacrifice the lives of your people? So he or she is going to, all right, Glenn, we're not going to approve. We're not going to do it. Let's do yours. So
Well, before we wrap, I'd like to bring us back to the youth. We started this conversation
Okay.
talking about the young, how they helped you with the ECCRI.
RI, yes.
How can we help them? They have so much fear about the future, about climate change, more than access to education. How can we help empower them right now to deal with that problem today?
My suggestion will always be the same recommendation that I give to every talk. We need more people. We need to engage more people and let them aware what's really happening on the ground. All right, not just on the global scale, but in your own community. They have to start with their own communities. So once they see what is really happening on the ground, then we can provide training. We can empower them. Okay, what are you going to do to solve your own problem in your own communities? You have to start from there. You don't have to go to Visayas. For example, if you're in Luzon, you don't have to go to Visayas and help the Visayas or the Mindanao. You start with your own community because you have been there for the longest time. And since that you know what is happening, you can provide the right solution. That is also I'm not saying the best solution, but the right solution that your people truly deserve. So, and this is what I also tell them. You don't have to be a scientist like me. You don't have to be a lawyer, a policymaker. Because part of the training or capacity development is anyone can make a difference if you're going to transform your passion into action. So that's it.
Well, it could be a cool to be a mini science diplomat in your
Abs-
community.
Absolutely, yes.
Just to get
Yes,
started.
yes,
Well, thank
correct.
you so much, Glenn, for the opportunity.
Oh, thank
All
you
the
so
best
much.
in your
Thank you so
endeavors.
much. Thank you.
And catch us again next Thursday at 9 p.m. Philippine Standard Time on One News. You can also check out the long conversation on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. And if you haven't done so, like or follow my social media pages. I'm Kathy Yang, and this is Thought Leaders.